Let's take a more detailed look at the concepts and methodology behind evaluating projects which work on the business. So really, there are two types of actions that people do inside organizations. One type of activity is processes. These are repeatable activities that you do on an ongoing basis that typically has an input, does some sort of work on it, and then has a different output. So any processes, payroll, accounts payable, sales, customer service, they all fit into a process category. Some processes like strategic planning or budgeting may happen infrequently, once a year, but they're still a process. They're still repeatable. It just has a different drumbeat. Another group of activities are projects. Projects, in theory, are activities that have a defined beginning and end. Usually they have an allocation of people or time, financial budget, and expectations about deliverables and paybacks. Now, it's important to note that it's a fuzzy line between these two things. You could stop your work in the middle of the day and organize your desk. Well, in fact, you've stopped your process and you're doing a very small project, then you can go back to the process. So it's going to be hard for you to categorize between these two groups of activities. And really, we don't care. So long as we have 100% of the activities covered between these two categories when you do the analysis. Typically, for this work, we're going to be looking at the significant projects and ignore the ones like cleaning your desk or whatever the threshold is in your organization. So two types of activities, processes and projects. Now, those things happen in two modes. Some of those projects work in the organization, and some work on the organization. So when you're working in the organization, you're effectively operating, you're doing the process, you're doing the payroll activity, you're doing the accounts receivable activity. When you're working on the organization, typically you're going to stop the activity that you are doing and enter into a new activity that's going to deliver a better process for the organization and a better way to operate. So for example, building this balanced scorecard and strategic monitoring system is a project where you're working on the business. When you're done, if we're lucky, you will have created a new way of operating that will generate operational gains in the organization in a repeatable process, your monthly reporting activity. So if we put this on a 2x2, we could put the processes and projects up the left axis, and down the bottom, activities where I'm working in the organization and on the organization across the bottom. So if we take a look at the sort of the first logical grid, processes when I'm working in the organization. They're things, as we said before, accounts payable, customer service, billing, all those sorts of things. Projects generally fit in this category over here, where I'm working on the organization. So those are things like delivering a new organization design, building a balanced scorecard, doing a merger and acquisition, and so forth. There are some categories which are a bit fuzzy. So for example, something like a project when I'm working in the organization, let's say IT is building a new software application or implementing a new accounting module. In theory, that's working in the business, the new accounting module. But in fact, it's also working on the business. It's delivering a better capability that will help your organization perform better in the future. So some projects kind of sit on the line. In fact, frequently activities inside of information technology groups and many times human resources are projects, but they're working in the organization. Finally, when I have a process working on the organization, might be a process like a Six Sigma or Lean process improvement methodology or process that your organization uses on a repeatable basis, or performance audits, financial audits, and so forth. The net is, it's a 2x2 matrix, and for the purposes of the process analysis, we definitely focused in this quadrant over here. And if we want to cover off 100% of what the activity does, when we begin looking at projects in this case, we'll be covering off these other three quadrants during the work we're about to describe. Now, in theory, you can't take a look at all the projects in the organization because there'll be 8 gazillion of them. So you need to be focused on core projects which have an explicit goal of delivering better processes when they're completed. But you'll probably still need to set some size threshold below which you're not going to take a look at them, so that initially at least you're only looking at the top 10 or 12 projects. So many organizations will choose a dollar value or an FTE value, and any project less than that, they're not going to consider in this first pass. So the way the analysis gets done, if you remember, we've already taken a look at the process and identified how well the processes are currently performing, what performance is needed, what the current performance level is, and what the gap is between how we currently perform and how we need to perform. So these projects should be focused on the goal part of the bar, right? We want to launch some projects to improve how these processes currently operate. So to do that, what we should be able to do is, again, list the strategic objectives down the left, and across the top, put in our core projects. Now these projects, we will then rate and rank what their impact is on these strategic objectives. And we're going to score them high, medium, and low. High means that, within this year, we have to pick some time horizon, the project will have a high impact on closing the process strategic performance gaps that are observed. And M, or medium, means that within this year, the project will have a medium impact. And L, of course, means low. And if there's no score, obviously that project does not impact that strategic objective. So once we've scored the whole matrix, we can then do the same thing and begin developing a score. Now, many projects will impact multiple strategic objectives. That's fine. Don't get carried away, but do make sure that you capture at least the significant areas where that project is likely to have an impact. When we score this, what we'll do is just take a look at the gold part of the gap, the gap that we need to close. So if we take a look at this chart, now I'm going to get rid of the gold bars and only focus in on the results, on the analysis of the initiatives. So what we can see, for example, the initiatives that contact reduced turnaround time are going to have a significant impact on them compared to projects, for example, that are focused in on low ticket price, not nearly the large impact. So if I combine these two graphs, what I begin to see is that in some cases I have more project focus than gap. In other cases, I may be significantly underinvesting in that gap closing activity. We also frequently see cases where there are projects which are no longer necessary, but we haven't closed those projects down. We need the capability of seeing that that project is no longer strategic, so we can close it down and reallocate those resources in other places where they may give us better traction. Now, it's important to note on this chart that it's a two-axis graph. The gold bar is charted against the left axis, and the red dots, the projects, on the right. Now, we've taken the actual numeric value of those charts off of this chart because it's all a relative scoring. It's in strategy points, not a hard metric like currency. But it's important to note that they're not on the same axis. So what we're concerned with is looking at the gap between the relative gap between these two things. So here the gold bar and these two strategic objectives is roughly the same, yet there's significantly less investment in projects on this activity compared to this activity. It's just the conversation that we're trying to get to, and the leadership team is going to have to make the tough decisions about what to do with this information. But it's definitely the case. We're now highlighting information that's never been seen by the leadership team before. So overall, this will inspire a conversation about how to align the projects and project focus.